Blog Talk Radio.
Carol the Coach. Sex, love, and relationships. We talk about it here.
Carol the Coach. Compassion with contemporary relevance.
I am a psychotherapist. I can be your personal life coach, and I can help you with your issues. There are no problems too small or too big. You can talk about anything.
Speaker, columnist, radio TV host, and commentator. Carol the Coach brings messages of wellness and empowerment within reach of everyday people every day.
Almost 5 years ago, I lost my soulmate in an accident. He was killed in a plane crash. Life just, for me, has seemed to stop.
There are groups all over the city. I teach one. It is a specific way to start thinking so that you shift how you see the world, which then shifts your energy, and then you feel better and you actually see things differently.
Carol the Coach. Always available, too, at carolthecoach.com.
Now, I've got Russell on the line.
I'm 47 years old. I'm a truck driver. I'm married. I have a wife in San Francisco.
Okay.
I haven't been home in 6 months. My thing is, I don't know if I have a sex addiction or what the problem is. Why do I want what I can't have? And as soon as I can have it, I don't want it anymore.
You're right on target when you say, I don't know if I have a sexual addiction. Well, guess what? Yes, you do. And you know what? That's my specialty, Russell, so you're at the right place. Continue.
I meet women online, and I'm in a different part of the country. I travel all 48 states, so I love sex.
I hear self-esteem issues. You never felt good enough, and you didn't feel like you were getting what you should have then, and you're reenacting that now. Do you want to change that about yourself? You get what you need. I got an interesting email, and hey there, Carol the Coach here. And you know that you can always email me at carolthecoach.com, and I will help you figure out what you need to do. I got to tell you, it's mind-boggling because I have 750,000 open downloads a week, but I want you to know that I am in it for you guys. So if you're an addict and you have questions, if you're a partner and you have questions, if you're not really sure what the deal is, I just want you to know I absolutely want to be a resource for you. So let me share with you this email I got this week. It says, Dear Carol, longtime listener of your podcast, I am grateful for all you do for addicts and the betrayed partners. I know you're very busy, so I hope you can answer this. She says, I wanted to reach out and ask this, although I know the answer in my gut. I just felt like reaching out as I am feeling really isolated today. This is a betrayed partner. Now, already she said, I know the answer in my gut. And you all have heard me say there are 3 ways to make a decision. The first way is to, A, ask yourself, what do I think? Access that intellectual part of yourself and say, what do I think? What do I think about this? The second way is to access your heart. Now, your heart is your emotions. How do you feel? What do you feel about this situation? Memo here, feelings get you into trouble more often than not. And then the third way is your intuition. What does my gut say? Okay, she said, I know the answer in my gut. I just felt like reaching out. And here's what I know to be true, and I do this all the time myself. You know, it helps when you talk out loud how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you believe to somebody that you trust. When you do that, you're much more likely to believe yourself. So she says, my husband and I have been married 20 years, and we have a daughter and a son, aged 8 and 14. I have tried to be the supportive wife, trying to work on my own healing, but I've reached a point where I feel like his recovery commitments aren't consistent. For accountability software, He has not acted out and has been sober, she puts that in quotes, but he is at a place now where he is so stressed about money that he's overworking and states he does not have time for recovery work right now. Here's what her gut says, that this is not acceptable. I know addicts must be consistent, but I am being met with resistance and anger. I live in the United States, and there isn't much help in my small town. We have received help via phone or online Zoom. Now, for you all that don't know, Zoom is like Skype, but it's HIPAA compliant. I do Zoom. A wonderful venue if you don't have any help, but my belief is face-to-face is always the best. My husband found Sex Addicts Anonymous, but he only went once. And I am so tired of his excuses. I just don't know what else to do. Part of the problem is that he is not doing the work that I know he needs to do. Now, I know addicts must be consistent, but I'm being met with resistance and anger. And then when he says he doesn't have time to work on his recovery, it makes me believe that he really doesn't want to. What do you think, Carol? What should I do? Okay, now you all know that I can't tell you what to do, but I will tell you my experience, and that is that this sex addiction is not something you can play with. You can't dabble in recovery. You got to work it with a vengeance. And if somebody is really overworked, working lots and lots of hours, that's not healthy in and of itself. So he needs to find some work-life balance and balance his work life with recovery life, with relaxation life, with fun life. And if he's not willing to work on his recovery, he's either going to show up and be marginal at best, or he's not going to be able to do the work it takes to not be a sex addict. Now, I said that, but the truth of the matter is, once a sex addict, always a sex addict. But in recovery, you can be an amazing human being. It transforms you psychologically, and that makes a difference in your own life and in your family. So this woman says to me, married 20 years, he's not doing the work. What do you think? Well, what I think is that it is really time for you as a betrayed partner to take care of yourself. And if you're going to have boundaries about what you want him to do to feel safe and secure and stabilized, you need to have consequences too. Those consequences might look like, if you're not going to do the work, you can't live here. If you're not going to do the work, I'm going to ask for therapeutic separation. If you're not going to do the work, we cannot sleep together. If you're not going to do the work, we can be roommates in this house. But that's it. I know those are really intense consequences, but this is an intense disease. And, this disorder needs major focus and emphasis. I'm not just saying this to get everybody to work. This is brain science. And Patrick Carnes says it best when he says, if you do not have an entire committee, if you don't go to your meetings, whatever they are, if you don't get a mentor or a guide, if you don't do the reading, do the work, develop the fellowship, if you're not working with a CSAT, a certified sex addictions therapist, if you aren't participating in a sexual addiction group, if you're not praying, meditating, and or journaling, and you don't have those accountability tools to help you be honest, you're doomed for failure. So that's my answer. And I know it seems really negative because you already are saying he's not doing much. But the truth hurts and it helps. You, as a betrayed partner, want the truth. I'm here to give you that. And I'm here to give that to the addict. And there are many ways he can get the help that he needs and do the hard work, even if there is nobody in your community. He can do it online. He can do it via phone coaching. Those aren't the best ways, but they are ways. He can do the reading. He can do the journaling. He can go to a polygrapher, even if he has to travel 3 hours away 3 times a year. There are lots of things he can do. But the truth of the matter is most addicts won't until their wife, their partner, becomes steadfast in what she needs to feel safe. Okay, that's my advice. Every night when I'm doing this show, I drink a cup of coffee. You know, I started at 8, seeing clients, and it's 9 o'clock my time. I had a 2-hour break. Now, I'm not saying that so that you'll all go, oh, poor Carol. But the truth of the matter is I need a little boost. So I'm drinking a cup of coffee, and I want to just tell you about a faux pas that I made today. I'm working on my online course, Help or Heal, for those people that need to see me and hear the important parts of my book and study the course. And many of you know if you've listened to the show, I wanted it done by the 3rd week in July. I gave myself a month. Now, I just talked to somebody that I really admire. He said it's taken 18 months to do his online course. Well, I promise myself, I'm going to get this done by the end of August. So I made the commitment, as I usually do, when something isn't happening fast enough, I will put forth the effort to get it done. And if that means I have to wake up at 4, because I normally get up at 5, I'll do it. So I set my alarm for 4:15, and I laid there for 5 minutes, and then I said, get up and get going. You need to get this done. And I really like doing it. It's just a learning curve, and whenever I have to learn something, and it takes me a long time, it makes me kind of mad. So I get up, and I go to turn on my TV in the kitchen while I make my coffee, and my local news isn't on. And, I mean, it immediately hit me. OMG. It's not 4:15. And I look at the clock, and it's 3:15. And I'm like, oh, are you kidding me? But, of course, I was already dressed to work out because I work out in the morning. And I was in the process of making the coffee. So I stayed up, and I said, you are going to be exhausted by 9 o'clock. Now, I got to tell you, when I'm exhausted, the only thing that jazzes me are friends, family, and coworkers that have a lot of energy. And tonight, I am super jazzed to be interviewing a man who has done an amazing job of studying wounding. And he really believes that most of the time it's at wounding is at the root of sexual addiction. So I'm going to be interviewing Troy Love. He's an LCSW, and he has written a book. And he's going to talk to you about that book, Finding Peace. And he's going to be talking about how we're all wired for connection, neurologically, biologically, sexually, emotionally, and socially. And he believes that connection is part of what helps us thrive and survive, especially in an increasingly toxic world where there's a lot of isolation. And so he's going to help you to look at, are there attachment wounds in your life that you've never really healed? And if there are, how do those attachment wounds fuel negative core beliefs? And as a coach, I'm a big believer, and most of us have at least one or two negative limiting beliefs. And so we're going to find out more about what Todd thinks is really the answer to getting healthy and to managing addiction and to working on attachment, because attachment is connection, and connection is the antidote for sexual addiction. If you've read Help or Heal, my book, you know that. I say that in the first chapter. So I'm really very excited to be talking with Troy. Troy Love, welcome to Sex Help with Carol the Coach.
Thank you, Carol. It's been amazing to be here. I'm really excited to be with you tonight.
Yes, well, you are doing incredible work around a very important topic that, I actually teach a course for clinicians and coaches working with sex addiction and betrayed partners, and I say, we've got to fix attachment. Attachment is at the root of all these kinds of addictions. So, Troy, tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this field and what your journey has been like.
Yes, of course. So, like many of us who got into this field, I got into this field because I had my own work to do. I remember when I was getting my bachelor's in social work, my professor told me, if you want to be a good therapist, if you want to be a good social worker, you're going to need to go to therapy yourself, go do your own work. And at the time, I was in such denial about what was going on in my life that I thought, I'm fine. I don't know what you're talking about. But what was going on underneath all that was that I was struggling with a porn addiction. And I didn't even know that it was an addiction. I didn't even know that that was a name for it. And it wasn't until I was getting my master's and I'm sitting in a drug and alcohol rehab program as an intern, and I'm hearing these people talk about their addictions to other substances. And I remember going home and telling my wife, I think I'm an addict. I can relate to what they're saying, this desire to stop it, this compulsion to not be able to, and this cycle that I keep getting myself stuck in. And that was when I really opened my eyes that, I have some work to do. And it was around that time that I started looking for my own therapist and started to do the work of healing this addiction for me. And that led me to really start reading all kinds of different books and watch movies and learn as much as I could about this field of addiction recovery. And I learned more than just even addiction recovery, but just recovering from what I later began to call attachment wounds, because I learned that that's really at the foundation of all of this. But that's kind of how I started, was my own wanting to scramble out of the black hole that I was feeling, and I couldn't take it anymore. Something had to change.
Yeah, I always think that's the best way to do it. When you yourself are hurting and you've got that desire to make your life better, it just works that you find the path that you need to, in your words, find peace and serenity in your life. So tell us now, what did you do?
We moved to where I still am living, which is Yuma, Arizona, which is in the bottom of Arizona. We're 15 minutes away from the border, and we're a rural town. I moved here about 20 years ago. There were no therapists in my area that knew anything about any of this, and there was probably only 5 or 6 to pick from anyway. So I got online and I found a therapist who wasn't a CSAP, but was familiar enough with this whole process to at least get me started. And I started to do some therapy with her over the phone. And that was really the first time I started to dig deep. into the work. And at the same time, I started going to some retreats. I went to some men's retreats. And as I'm going through this personal journey of therapy and going to some of these retreats and trying to figure out how I could understand this for myself, I began to develop this model that I call the Finding Peace model now, that really at the core of it is attachment wounds. And I realized that I have a huge abandonment wound. I was adopted when I was 5 days old, and although I know that my birth mother made that choice because she loved me, just the fact that I was in her womb for 9 months, I could hear her heartbeat, I could hear her voice, and then to be born and never to be able to hear that again. I was whisked away. The nurses took me away. It was a closed adoption. They didn't even let her hold me. They took me away and put me in a cradle, and I was in a cradle in the nursery for 5 days until my parents came to pick me up. Just that in and of itself, even though I didn't remember, I can imagine the trauma that was, that abandonment, and it started to make some sense for me. And then growing up, I was also bullied a lot, so there was a lot of rejection for me. And those two wounds really played a significant part in my addiction, because I discovered when I found porn that porn was willing to accept me whenever. It was never going to leave me. It would be there whenever I needed it to be. And so in a very dysfunctional way, it was trying to get those needs met. And as I started to explore that, I started to ask myself, what other kind of attachment wounds are there? And I finally boiled it down to 6 different attachment wounds that I really identify with. Nearly every one of the clients that I have come in to meet with me, they're also identifying, I have some of these wounds. In fact, I have a poster of the wounds up on the wall, and I'll listen to them for a little bit, and then I'll have them look over, and I'll say, which one of those wounds are yours? And like 95% of the clients will identify a couple, or there's a couple who say, I don't have any wounds. And then I'm like, well, that's curious. How come you're here to see me then? And then we start to explore it a little bit, and we're able to identify that. So that's how I started this journey of trying to just conceptualize for my own understanding in a way that could make sense for me. Once I identified those wounds, then I could start to identify, well, what am I going to do to heal these things so that I'm not continuing to turn to porn as a way of numbing the pain associated with these things? What can I do to heal it so that that's not what I keep turning to?
Yeah, I think that's amazing. So will you talk to us about the 6 types of attachment wounds?
Yeah, so the first one is loss. And loss can come from all kinds of sources. It's not just loss of a loved one, although that can be one of the aspects of that wound itself. But loss of a loved one, it could be loss of a job. It could be a loss of an arm or a leg, or you've got diabetes, or any kind of a loss that's associated where you had something in your life and now it's gone and it's not coming back. And that can be incredibly painful for individuals. The second one is neglect. And there's a spectrum of neglect. There's the Child Protective Services version of neglect, where parents are not providing food or clothing for their children. The 2-year-old is wandering out on the street in their diaper. That's a pretty severe form of neglect, which can be very painful. A lot of the people that I work with haven't experienced that kind of neglect. They experience neglect on the other side of the spectrum, which is they lived in a home where their mom and dad, or their mom or their dad or other caregivers were living in the home, but they never made time for the individual. And so even though they were in the home, they had food and shelter and clothing, they couldn't get their attention. They were too busy. My dad, his favorite pastime was sitting in front of the television for hours and hours and hours, not a whole lot of interaction. So that is a neglect wound where they're physically present. My basic needs are being met, but the attention that I need is not being met. The next one is rejection. And rejection is self-explanatory. It's where people in your life send a message to you that there's something wrong with you. You're not wanted. You don't belong here. So in my case, it was bullies who made fun of me and called me really horrible names, but it could also be you're not selected for a team, or you're not selected for a job, or you get fired, or those kind of rejection where someone is conveying to you that you're not wanted, you're not needed here. The fourth wound is abandonment, and I alluded that a little bit earlier, where in one moment the person is there, and then the next minute they're gone, and you don't understand why they left. And it's different than loss, because usually when someone dies, it's expected, or at least there's some foresight most of the time where you know that this person is passing away, and you have an opportunity to say goodbye. But in abandonment, the person just leaves. They're not there. There's no explanation about why they're gone. There's no closure with abandonment. It's like you're there, but all of a sudden you're not. Betrayal, which is one that we work with a lot with the partners of sex addicts, that's a really tender wound where you trusted someone. You put your heart and your life into connecting with somebody else, and then they did something that betrayed that trust. They lied, they cheated, they stole, they did something that broke that trust, and now that wound is very profound, and it's hard to move through life without believing that there's really anybody that is trustworthy anymore. And then the last is abuse. Sexual abuse, physical abuse, verbal abuse. It's where someone is purposely inflicting harm onto somebody else because of their own woundedness. So any of those six, loss, neglect, rejection, abandonment, betrayal, or abuse, those wounds really play at the core of both the betrayed partner and their healing journey, as well as the addict and their healing journey of what can we do to heal these wounds because they're so painful.
Boy, I can hear that. And, I say two things about those 6 types of attachment wounds. Patrick Carnes said that, in addition to being physically, emotionally, sexually abused, that neglect that you were talking about earlier is by far one of the toughest wounds because it doesn't get acknowledged or validated. And so I always work with people who seem to have a dismissive attachment disorder. They're like, it's not that big of a deal. I'm fine. I didn't need that. And I say, our guru, Patrick Carnes, said that was actually worse than being sexually, physically, or emotionally abused. And then what I know to be true about working with partners is that partner betrayal is way worse than sexual abuse. I mean, it is a situation where as an adult or as a young person that is old enough to have gotten married, to have been betrayed by the person that you were supposed to trust the most is heartbreaking and shattering. So I agree with all 6 wounds. I just wanted to reemphasize. I know there's probably not a worse, but I'm telling you, Patrick says neglect is. And my experience for partners is that being cheated upon, that kind of betrayal, is absolutely life-shattering. So establish the 6 types of wounds, and you even go so far as to say your experience with addiction is that somebody who has an addiction, you would almost guarantee that they have one of these wounds. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, how do you think? Yeah, go ahead.
No, what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to ask you, do you see a correlation? How do you think this plays out in terms of those negative core beliefs that end up haunting people? I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I am damaged goods. Those kind of negative core beliefs. How do you think they correlate with the 6 different attachment wounds?
So a lot of times these wounds happen when we're children. Obviously, the betrayal one can happen in an adult, as an adult with a partner who has betrayed them. But a lot of these wounds are happening when we're children, and we don't even really recognize that they're happening. For example, the neglect wound, they're trying to get their parents' attention, but their parents are just not making time for them. And so a child can't really wrap his head. A child doesn't have the cognitive ability to be able to identify, well, my dad has some issues of his own and he really needs to go get some therapy, and I know that I'm still important and I matter, and my mom she's working 2 jobs and that's why she's not able to spend time. A child doesn't have the cognitive ability to do that, and they live in a very egocentric paradigm, and so the only thing that they have the ability to do is to ask the question, well, why is this happening? And the answer is, well, it must be me. It has to be something about me from their egocentric perspective. And so when they begin to have these wounds created and they're trying to make sense out of why it's happening, they begin to develop these negative core beliefs. Well, it must be that there's something wrong with me, or it must be that I wasn't a good enough boy, or it must be that I wasn't trying hard enough, or those kind of negative core beliefs. And every time that wound gets hit, every time that wound gets opened up again, it reinforces the negative core belief. And I use an analogy. I love J.K. Rowling's imagery when Harry Potter is in trouble because Professor Umbridge thinks that he is not telling the truth, and so she's going to send him to detention. And he has to write sentences. He has to write, "I must not tell lies," over and over again. She has him use a magical pen that literally scratches the letters of "I must not tell lies" into his arm as he's writing it on the piece of paper. And it causes a lot of pain. It's very painful. And he does it the first time, and then he asks Professor Umbridge, "Well, how many times do I have to write this?" And she says, until it sinks in. You have to write it until it sinks in. And to me, that's exactly what happens with these negative core beliefs. They get rewritten over and over and over on our hearts. Every time we feel rejection, every time we feel neglected, that feeling of I'm not enough, or I'm powerless, or I can't trust anybody, or the world isn't safe, those negative core beliefs begin to be etched in our heart, and they're tattooed there. And that changes the paradigm upon which we see the world. And now we're looking for evidence, and I have evidence in air quotation marks, we're looking for evidence that will support that negative core belief now. Well, see, here's another reason why I'm not enough. And oh, here's another reason why I'm not enough. And that becomes the paradigm in which they are viewing the world, all because they have this unresolved pain that hasn't been healed yet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because it hasn't been healed yet, it stays prevalent in their mind. And so what do you suggest our clients do to work through that healing process and take on a much more positive and realistic core belief about oneself?
Yeah, so part of this process is let's identify what some of the negative core beliefs are. If you can think of it like an onion, so at the core of this onion are the attachment wounds, and then the next layer are the core beliefs. And then the layer on top of that are our core emotions. There's anger, there's fear, and there's sadness that are part of that. And then on top of that, because all of that is painful, the wounds are painful, the negative core beliefs are painful, and the emotions, anger, fear, sadness, those can be painful to express, especially if we lived in a family of origin where those weren't tolerated, or those weren't supported. And so what covers all of that is shame. And shame shows up and just reinforces those negative core beliefs. And then we want to find a way to numb that. And that's where the addictive behaviors come in. We want to just numb all that because this is so incredibly painful. So part of the process of healing is, well, let's first identify whether or not you're numbing. And if you're numbing, then let's develop some tools. And CSAT therapists do a really great job. And full disclosure, I'm working on my CSAT, but I'm not there yet. But CSAT have a really incredible set of tools to be able to help identify what can we do to stop numbing this behavior. What is this all about? So let's start with that first, and set up some structure. Let's start going to some meetings and go to therapy and go to group and do your work so that we can figure out how you can stop numbing. And once we've been able to figure out some tools to stop numbing, now we got to drill a little bit deeper. We got to work through the shame, and we really need to tackle those negative core beliefs. A really simple but effective way of looking at that is just writing them down and then asking a question about whether or not this is true. Is this really 100% true? And the one that I use a lot is I'm not enough. So let's write that down on a piece of paper. I'm not enough. Is that true? Well, it feels true. Yes, but is it true? Is it 100% true? And then let's add 2 words to the end of that sentence. I'm not enough for what? And I just did this today with one of my clients who was saying, I'm not good enough. And I wrote it on the board, I'm not good enough for blank. And then he wrote, I'm not good enough for God. And then we sat with that, and I said, do you really believe that that's true? Do you feel like you're not good enough for God? And he said, no, I know that God loves me. I know he does. I know that I'm battling with my own sense of not being good enough. And so we were able to crack it open a little bit, and we were able to move a little bit and see if we could shift that. And so he said, well, maybe it's not 100% true. Maybe it's only 75% true. Well, that's awesome, because now we have 25% space to be able to work in to see if we can continue to chisel this negative core belief until it's not there at all. And so just writing it down and asking, well, is it true, is an excellent start of trying to break down this negative core belief.
You know, you're singing my tune. Have you ever seen Byron Katie's work called
Oh, I love Byron Katie's work.
What Is?
Yes, I love that.
Because that's the same thing. She says, is this true? Do you absolutely know that it's true? How would you feel without the thought? How can you turn it around? So,
right.
And you know, we know that clients have to do the work. They have to practice some of the things that may not feel comfortable to actually, if you will, do the fake it till you make it, or act as if you can believe something different about yourself.
Right. Yeah. And so being willing to look at it and say, wow, I have been carrying around this negative core belief that says I'm not enough. Now let me really do some introspection. Is it really true? And like Byron does, Katie does, she turns it around. Can you give me some evidence where it isn't true? Can you give me some evidence where you have been enough? Can you give me some evidence where you have been powerful, that you've had choices? And when they start to do that, we're starting to erase the negative core belief and replace it with a new one.
Well, and so you personify shame, oftentimes related to the linkage up to the core belief. So talk a little bit more about how you deal with shame when it's directly attached to a limiting negative core belief.
Perfect. So I learned this from a man named Gary Van Warmerdam, and I can't remember the website, but I learned this. I signed up for one of his classes, and I really loved the way that he did this. He doesn't talk about it from a shame perspective, but that's how I took it away from it. So shame is this nebulous thing. Brene Brown defines it as the deep and abiding belief and feeling that I'm flawed and defective and therefore unworthy of love and belonging. But it's this blanket emotion, this master emotion that just covers over everything else and makes it flat. But it's oftentimes hard for clients to be able to know how to work with that, how to develop some resiliency to it. And so I developed 6 archetypes of shame, and I call them the shadows of shame. And each one of them has a different message that's very much tied into those negative core beliefs. They amplify them in different ways. And when I introduce the shadows of shame, the first one that I normally introduce is the judge, because that's usually the one that most people can connect with at first. It's that voice in your head that's telling you, well, you're not enough, you're not trying hard enough, you're not doing it right. Why did you do that? Why are you wearing that? I can't believe that you decided to show up looking like that today. That voice in our head, and I say, okay, so just listen to it for a moment. How loud is that voice? And they usually say it's really loud. How often is that voice talking to you? Well, it doesn't ever stop. It's always talking to me. It's always super critical. And I talk about how it has this rule book about the rules of life, and it's probably 4 or 5 feet thick, this book, and the rules in there contradict each other. They don't even make sense. And so one moment you're trying to follow the rules, you're trying to be a good little boy or a good little girl doing this, and then your teacher gives you a look that is unhappy, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I must have broke that rule, and here comes the judge and says, yeah, I can't believe you did that. You're really dumb. You're really stupid. And so that voice, that first shadow of shame, is the one that I introduce to people first, because it helps them understand, oh, yeah, I can hear that. Then I say, so here's the interesting thing. That voice is not you. If you listen really closely to that shadow of shame, that judge, you'll recognize that it isn't actually you. And they'll sit with it for a moment, and then I hear all kinds of different ways that people describe it. They say, yeah, it actually sounds like my mom, or yeah, it sounds like one of my old school teachers, or it sounds like an old witch, or it sounds like a really stern man. I'm like, yeah, so notice that isn't you. So let's just imagine that we could put that judge over here on this other chair sitting across the room from you, and we start using some Gestalt empty chair technique kind of thing, and we put the judge over across the room, and then I say, now look at that judge and notice what it feels like to have it over there. And just that exercise alone is so empowering for people, because they realize, man, I've been listening to this voice for years and years thinking it was me talking to me, but it wasn't actually me. It was this shame talking to me and beating me up and telling me I'm not enough, but I can move it over there and I can stand back from it a little bit, and I can realize I don't have to listen to you. I don't have to agree with what you're saying anymore. It's really an empowering exercise that I use a lot with people. Would you like me to go over the other 5, or do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
No, I love this. Go over the next 5.
Okay. So the judge is the first one. The second one is the impotent one. And the impotent one is the voice that tells you can't, that you shouldn't even try. It's kind of a victim-y voice, a defeatist voice that says, I don't even know why you're trying. This is never going to work out. You should just give up. I don't know why you're even bothering to do this. It never works out for you. Just this very victim-y voice. And we can do the same thing that we do with the judge and have that one sitting across the room. And what does that one look like? And they're able to identify that it's a very different character. It's a very different looking character. It sounds different. We can recognize those two. Oh, so there's my judge, and oh, there's my impotent one. Yeah, they're both talking to me at the same time. The next one is the rebel, and the rebel is the voice of the addiction that basically is saying, you know what, you can just go do whatever you want to do. Who cares if it hurts anybody else? Who cares about the impact that it's going to have on anybody else's life? You need to just go do what you want to do. It's a very selfish voice that's encouraging us to really drop off all our values, to cut off our values and cut off the connections that we have with the people that matter most to us, and ignore all of that and just go do whatever we want to do. And so I can help them understand that, look, oftentimes when you are wanting to go act out, that voice is that shadow's been tapping you on the shoulder. The next one is the martyr. And the martyr is the one who really likes to tell you that your needs are not as important as anybody else's needs, that as long as you can make everybody else happy, then you've served your purpose in life. It's a very martyry kind of self-sacrificing, defeating sort of voice that can show up, especially when you're wanting to vocalize your needs, when you're wanting to state your needs. This one will show up and say, well, no, their needs are more important than yours, so you really shouldn't ask for what you need. The last two are a little bit different. The last two is the politician, and the politician says that you need to earn points. You need to get brownie points. You need to look a certain way. You need to act a certain way so that you can get points, so that you can get votes, so that you can get people's recognition. And so it's a very much portraying this facade that you're supposed to portray on the outside so that you can get recognition and credit from other people. And the last one, which is different than the other five, is the royal. And the royal, instead of convincing you that there's something wrong with you like the other five do, in one way or another, they're all convincing you that there's something wrong with you. The royal says you're better than everybody else, that you're entitled, you deserve, and it sets you apart the other way, which elevates you and makes you look down on other people and think that you're better. But either way, whether it's the judge or whether it's the rebel, both or the royal, those two are actually separating us from the connections that we want. Judge says, I'm not enough. Judge says, you're not enough. There's something wrong with you. And so that makes me want to pull away and hide. And the royal says, well, there's nothing wrong with you. There's something wrong with them. And they're horrible, and they're a horrible person. And in that place, it makes me separate from them. And so it actually amplifies the abandonment, the rejection, the betrayal, the other attachment wounds that we got, because of these shadows of shame are actually making connection almost impossible.
Well, and the disconnection from oneself and from community occurs, which continues the wounding. And so
right.
I can really see especially how this framework, when followed, can help people to transform into the person that they want to be. But they have to deal with their attachment wounds. They have to deal with their shame. They have to deal with their limiting core beliefs. And it doesn't hurt if they actually work your Finding Peace model that comes straight from your book, Finding Peace.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about how your book can transform life.
So I wrote the book Finding Peace because I'd been talking about this for 10 years, and people were really wanting to understand where could they learn more about that. And I was pulling all of this stuff from all kinds of experts, but it wasn't condensed into one resource. So finally somebody said, you should write a book. And I said, oh, okay, I'll get right on that. And then I actually decided to get on that. And I wrote the book, and it's a fusion of a fictional group. So there are 8 people who are coming to this group. Each one of them is battling with a different attachment wound or a series of attachment wounds. And they attend this group, and they meet the group therapist, who starts to unpack what we've been talking about tonight and helps them start to identify what their wounds are. And then at the end of each chapter, the reader is given the exercises that the characters in the book were given. And so a lot of the readers have told me that it's almost as if they were the 9th member of the group. They really felt like they were part of that group. And they're able to do the worksheets, the workbook exercises that identify. There's a wound assessment in Chapter 1, and then there's a core beliefs assessment in Chapter 2. And as it moves forward, we start to identify these different, what are the emotions that you're feeling? Where do you feel it in your body? Which shadows of shame are hijacking your life? All of that. And it starts to unpack it in a way that is at least it makes sense to me, and it makes sense to the readers that I've had. And it really fits really well with pretty much every other mental health theory that's out there, whether it's attachment theory or CBT or DBT or whatever the model is. It just kind of fits with all of that, and so it makes it easy for a person, regardless of who they're working with, to be able to identify these things, and gives them some vocabulary to be able to talk about the healing, and then continue to use the tools that they're finding from other resources.
Well, and you have a special offer whereby people can download something free. Can you tell our listening audience about that?
Yeah, so if they go to troylove.com, they can download my second book, which is available for free, called The Art of Peace. And The Art of Peace was written, I was listening to Sun Tzu's Art of War, and I realized, he has a lot of principles here that a lot of people read for how you can beat other people, how you can win at battles. And I thought, the battle that I'm battling is not because I want to beat other people, but it's because I want to heal from my addiction. That's the battle I want, but I also want to be able to do it in a way that's loving and embraces connection. And so I wrote my own version of Sun Tzu's Art of War, and I call it The Art of Peace, and that's available for free as a free download if they go to troylove.com.
Okay, so one more time, because our listening audience may have been interested in hearing about that and didn't capture that information. They have to go to, again, your website is?
I talk fast. troylove.com. There's an L in the middle, so it's troylove.com.
And they can get your second book for free. And the name again
Correct.
of that book is?
The Art of Peace.
The Art of Peace. And so I'm a big believer in when you get free resources, when you have that opportunity, that was meant to be. So I'm encouraging our listening audience to get that, as well as to peruse Troy's website, because it's really fascinating. I mean, you've got a lot of resources available, and you can see that you've made it your mission to help people to do the deep work they need to do so that they're not just band-aiding their addiction, but they are actually healing it. So, Troy, what would you suggest for our betrayed partners who also listen to this show?
One of the images that really stood out to me when I was a medical social worker for a while. I worked in a hospital, in an inpatient, like a regular hospital, for a while, and I was fascinated by the pictures in the patient's charts of the wounds that they had, and they were kind of gross to look at, but I was fascinated by them and just how big they could get and the different types of wounds. And they had nurses that were specifically trained to do wound care for these wounds so that they could heal and the person could get back to their lives. And that's really the message that I'd say to the addicts, but particularly to the betrayed partners. You've been wounded. It's really big, and it hurts so badly. It's the analogy that I use with these wounds is they're like a sunburn, where you go to the beach, you forgot to put sunscreen on, you get baked, but you have to go to work the next day. And so you put your clothes on, and you're able to go to work, and you're able to function, but you're just praying that nobody comes up and touches you. Because if they come up and put their arm on you or they bump up against you, that causes so much pain. And that's what these wounds are like, especially the betrayal wound. It's like you can function. You can do the different things that you need to do from day to day, but there's this constant fear that the wound is going to get smacked again, the wound is going to get reopened, the wound is going to have somebody stick a knife in there and twist it around a little bit. And so what we want to be able to do is help the betrayed partner know that there is healing that's possible to heal that wound. Let's do some wound care for you so that it doesn't hurt so bad. so that you can actually make some more educated decisions about what's in the best interest of you and your loved ones, not from a fearful place of, oh my gosh, is the wound going to get smacked again, but from an empowered place where they're able to rewrite the negative core beliefs that and rewrite them into positive ones that say, I am enough, I'm worthy of love and belonging, I have choices, I have the ability to figure out what I need to do, I can make those choices, and rewriting those negative core beliefs into positive ones so that they're empowered to do what they can to help facilitate that wound care.
So I am curious, if people want to contact you directly, how can they contact you?
They can go to troylove.com. They can also email me at troy@troylove.com. I also have a podcast that I just started about a month ago that they can find also on troylove.com and listen to that. And I also have an online course. I heard you talking about building your online course. I know the challenges that is to build that and understand the technology behind it. And I recently finished one of my own, and that's also available. You can learn more about that at troylove.com.
Oh, I'm going to have to check that out for sure. I love to see what other people are doing. And, you know, the work that you're promoting, again, really helps with the deep wounds that have occurred from childhood on up. So, Troy L. Love, thank you so much for sharing your book, sharing your resources.
Oh,
listening
thank you.
audience needs to get that free one, yeah. And keep us in tune with what you're doing, and let's have you back on the show.
I would love that, Carol. It's been such a pleasure being with you tonight. Thank you so much.
All right, Troy. Keep in touch, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thank you. Bye.
So, again, that was Troy Love, and he is an expert on wounding. He believes it's at the root of sexual addiction. And so what I know to be true is that addicts oftentimes treat their addiction with the 10 recovery tools, and that's a wonderful choice. But in addition to that, you have to work on the wounding that's occurred in your life so that you don't do something called trauma reenactment, which basically says, hey, if something happened to me and I don't feel good enough, I'm going to sabotage my life and create more scenarios where I am not good enough. And that just isn't working in your favor. So go to his site and check it out and get his free book. And I really believe you're a work in progress, but you have to work it. Now, as I say at the end of every show, there'll only be one of you at all times, so I fearlessly want you to have the courage to be yourself and work on those things that you know will create the life you deserve. You make it a great week, and we'll see you later for more Sex Help with Carol the Coach.